Imagine walking away from the sun. The heat of the plains and the restless, chaotic wind fade into a memory as you step into a narrow slit in a granite hillside in eastern India. The air changes in a single heartbeat. It loses its weight of dust and light, becoming cool, sterile, and impossibly still. It feels as though the entire mass of the mountain is leaning against your skin, yet it does not crush you. It stabilizes you. As you move deeper into the lightless throat of the earth, you reach a chamber where the walls defy the laws of the primitive. They are not the jagged, weeping rocks of a natural cave. They are sculpted. They are polished to such a high, black mirror finish that they feel like cold silk or dark glass under your fingertips. In this absolute void, these lithic membranes reflect a light that does not exist in the physical world. Then, you release a sound. You do not shout. You simply exhale a single, low hum. The note does not dissipate. It catches on the geometric precision of the ceiling and begins to rotate. It spirals from the floor to the crown of the hall, gaining a physical momentum, turning your breath into a low-frequency roar that resonates within your very marrow. The mountain is not merely echoing you. It is amplifying your own biological frequency back into your bones. For 6 long seconds, the universe is reduced to that one vibrating note. The traditional history books tell us these were the works of wandering monks with crude iron tools. They tell us these were shelters from the monsoon or the summer heat. But you do not polish a tectonic plate to a mirror finish just to stay dry. You do not calculate the exact mathematical curvature of a granite vault just to hide from a storm. These were not refuges. They were psychoacoustic laboratories. And we are standing inside an instrument that has been waiting for a player for 2,000 years. There is a city in the high plateaus of Anatolia that challenges everything we know about the endurance of the human spirit. It possesses no towers, no ramparts, and no visible gates. To an observer standing on the surface 1,000 years ago, there was only the dry grass and the indifferent wind. But beneath that soil, 18 stories of carved volcanic tuff spiral into the cooling depths of the crust. This is Derinkuyu, a subterranean hive that once breathed for 20,000 people. When you descend into these corridors today, the first thing that strikes you is the atmospheric purity. It is an impossibility. Hundreds of feet below the sun, the air remains as crisp as a forest dawn. The ancient architects utilized over 15,000 hidden ventilation shafts, vertical lungs of stone that pull the cooling breath of the earth down into the labyrinth. How did they master the fluid dynamics of the wind without a single mechanical fan? The narrative we are taught is one of desperate fear. We are told of armies sweeping across the land and of terrified families rolling massive circular stones across the tunnels to lock the world out. It is a story of victims hiding in a bunker. But there is a profound flaw in this logic. Fear creates cramped, jagged holes. Fear creates chaos and haste. It does not create massive, vaulted cathedrals with perfect acoustic properties. It does not carve out complex wineries, vast stables, and schools with such elegant mathematical grace. The people who carved Derinkuyu were not running away from soldiers. They were running away from the sky itself. Evidence from ice cores and ancient sediment suggests that during this era, the Earth's magnetic shield began to flicker and weaken. The sun was no longer a gentle provider. It was a source of invisible, high-altitude radiation and geomagnetic noise. On the surface, the human nervous system was being bombarded by a cosmic static that triggered mass anxiety, cognitive decay, and a loss of the internal signal. The surface had become a place of psychic madness. The silent architects fled into the basalt to find the only shield that could stop the scream of the sun. They were building Faraday cages out of the planet's own skin. They were seeking the absolute zero of the soul. But once they were shielded, they began to hear something that the noise of the sun had always hidden. There is a small, sun-scorched island in the heart of the Mediterranean called Malta. For centuries, we believed its ancient inhabitants only built upward, raising massive limestone blocks to face the stars. But in the early years of the 20th century, a group of workers accidentally broke through a stone ceiling and discovered a cathedral carved into the living rock. This is the Hippodrome of Hal Saflieni. It is a 3-story labyrinth, a descending spiral of silence where the light of the sun has not touched the floor for 5,000 years. The walls are not merely cut. They are sculpted into organic, flowing curves that mimic the architecture of the surface. But here, the void is the master. The space was not constructed. It was hollowed out of the Earth's own memory. In one specific chamber, there is a small, unassuming niche carved into the wall at the level of a man's mouth. If a man speaks into this cavity in a low, steady voice, the entire subterranean complex begins to breathe. Modern acoustic engineers and neurologists have brought their sensors into this dark room. They discovered that the chamber is tuned to a very specific frequency, exactly 110 Hertz. When the human brain is exposed to this precise pitch, a biological switch is flipped. Clinical brain scans show that at this frequency, activity in the prefrontal cortex, the seat of the logical ego and linear language, suddenly deactivates. The brain shifts into a theta state, the realm of deep trance, creative visualization, and the moments just before birth. The architects were not just stonecutters. They were masters of psychoacoustics who worked with hammers. They knew that if you could vibrate the human skull at the right speed, you could dissolve the boundaries of the self. They weren't looking at the walls. They were looking at the silence inside their own nervous systems, using the stone to bypass the noise of the personality. They had built a machine to speak directly to the soul. But why did they need such a powerful tool? What were they trying to hear that the day would not allow? We have been taught to worship the light. We see the sun as the source of all life, and we are right. But the ancients understood that the sun is also a great distractor. It is a veil of brilliant noise. The solar wind and the magnetic friction of the atmosphere create a constant high-frequency static that vibrates through every cell in our bodies, keeping our minds in a state of superficial agitation. Imagine trying to perceive the slow, deep movement of a tectonic plate while standing in the middle of a thunderstorm. The thunder is too loud. The rain is too fast. To hear the truth of the world, you must go where the storm cannot reach. The architects of the subterranean understood that the surface is a place of sensory turbulence. They saw the wind and the sunlight as a form of interference that prevented the human mind from synchronizing with the deeper rhythms of the planet. So, they built their cities as biological filters. By descending 50 feet beneath the solid limestone or granite, they were entering a natural Faraday cage. The weight of the mountain absorbed the electromagnetic chaos of the sky. The psychic noise of the sun vanished. In that absolute isolation, the human heart begins to slow down. The internal dialogue, that constant, frantic stream of words, begins to fade. The nervous system, freed from the bombardment of the surface, begins to listen to a different broadcast. They were seeking a state of clarity that we would call super-consciousness. Under the ground, there is no day or night to tell the body when to wake or sleep. There is only the unchanging mineral presence of the earth. In that silence, the ancients practiced a form of collective awareness that we have entirely forgotten. They were not sitting in the dark because they were blind. They were sitting in the dark because they were finally starting to see. But as the silence deepened, the mind began to project its own reality onto the polished stone. The shadows began to move. The stone began to hum. And the architects realized that once the shield was in place, they were no longer alone in the deep. In the arid plains of Bihar, India, there are monuments that challenge every theory of ancient toolmaking. They are the Barabar Caves, monolithic chambers hollowed out of solid granite, a stone so hard it blunts the finest modern steel. From the outside, they appear as humble stone mounds, like the gray backs of ancient titans resting in the dust. But once you cross the threshold, the world of the primitive stonecutter is obliterated. The interior surfaces of these halls are not merely smooth. They are polished to a high black mirror finish that rivals the precision of a telescope lens. The granite walls are so perfectly flat and reflective that in the pitch black, they seem to vanish, creating the illusion of infinite liquid space. This was achieved over 2,000 years ago. Now, we must ask the question that modern archaeology often avoids. How do you polish a stone of this hardness to a mirror finish in a place where there is no natural light? If you bring a torch inside, the thick soot ruins the delicate surface. If you work in the dark, the human eye cannot see the microscopic imperfections that must be removed. You cannot refine what you cannot perceive. Some researchers suggest a radical theory. The architects did not use physical friction alone. They used sound. By filling the chamber with a specific acoustic frequency, they could have induced a state of ultrasonic vibration in the abrasive sand against the walls. They weren't rubbing the stone, they were singing the stone into a state of molecular glass. In these halls, the darkness is not a void. Because the walls are so reflective, the tiniest spark of light is caught and amplified, bouncing millions of times until the room glows with a ghostly, sourceless luminescence. It is a place where the physical world begins to feel like a dream. But this lens of stone was not built for the eyes. It was built for the mind. A mirror for light is also a mirror for the soul. When you stand in the center of a mathematically perfect granite room, you are no longer a small, lost creature. You are the focal point of a cosmic instrument. They were using the geometry of the dark to focus the human consciousness into a single, needle-sharp point. If you remain in the deep long enough, you realize that the Earth is not a silent, dead weight. It is a colossal, low-frequency machine. In the tunnels of Derinkuyu, there is a constant, subtle movement of the atmosphere that feels like a slow, deliberate breath. The ancient architects knew that the ground beneath our feet vibrates at a frequency so deep it stays below the threshold of human hearing. It is the Schumann resonance, the heartbeat of the planet itself. On the surface, we are disconnected from this pulse. Our feet move across the grass, our attention is scattered by the wind, and we are insulated by the chaos of life. But down in the stone, you are plugged back into the planetary circuit. The rock acts as a massive conductor, carrying the heavy, rhythmic thrum of the earth directly into your skeletal structure. The silent architects designed their chambers to match this pulse. They used the thickness of the basalt walls and the height of the vaulted ceilings to create a state of harmonic coupling. They were trying to synchronize the human cardiovascular system with the tectonic heart of the world. This is why the ventilation shafts in these underground cities are carved with such impossible precision. They are not merely pipes for air. They are the flutes of a subterranean organ. When the wind passes over the surface openings of these shafts, it creates infrasound, vibrations that bypass the ears and go straight to the nervous system. This sound tells the primitive part of the brain that it is safe. It tells the adrenal glands to stop their frantic production of stress hormones. It signals the mind to let go of the frantic surface reality. In this state, the boundaries between people begin to dissolve. The inhabitants of the deep were not isolated individuals. They were a collective organism, breathing the same air and vibrating to the same mineral note. They had created a neural network made of flesh and stone, a world where the silence was a shared language. But this unity came with a price. To be so open to the earth is to be open to everything the earth remembers. And as the centuries passed, the architects realized that the silence was starting to take on a life of its own. The quarantine was working. But the minds inside it were changing into something that was no longer entirely human. We often think of the earth as a solid, inert mass. But to the architects of the deep, the earth was a filter of divine proportions. They knew that the surface of our world is not a peaceful garden. It is a battleground of invisible forces. It is a place constantly bombarded by a rain of energy and high-frequency particles that pour down from the stars and the violent breath of the sun. On a clear day, you feel the warmth of the light, but your nervous system is also feeling the friction of the geomagnetic field. It is a constant high-frequency static that vibrates through every neuron in your brain, keeping the mind in a state of low-level, perpetual agitation. The silent architects believed this cosmic static was a poison for the higher functions of the human spirit. They saw the surface as a place of fragmentation and mental noise. They saw the wind and the sunlight as a veil that prevented the soul from seeing its own reflection. So, they built a shell. When you descend 50 feet beneath the granite of India or the volcanic tuff of Turkey, the rain of energy stops. The solid rock acts as a literal Faraday cage. The weight of the mountain absorbs the electromagnetic chaos of the solar wind. The magnetic static of the atmosphere is filtered out by the massive density of the mineral world. For the first time in your life, your brain is truly alone. This is the hidden technology of the underground cities. It was not about surviving a war between men or hiding from iron swords. It was about surviving a war for the coherence of the mind. They had created a lead-lined room for the human consciousness, a place where the signal-to-noise ratio was finally corrected. In that total isolation, the brain begins to change its fundamental frequency. It stops reacting to the external world because the external world has ceased to exist. It stops scanning for predators or distractions because there is only the abyssal stillness. The brain begins to map its own internal geography. It starts to generate its own internal light. It begins to perceive the quantum architecture of thought itself. In the deep, the mind becomes as vast and as quiet as the stone that surrounds it. They were not hiding in the dark. They were cleaning the lenses of their perception. They were preparing for a transmission that could only be received in the absolute zero of the soul. But as their mirrors became cleaner, They began to catch a signal that was never meant for the surface of the world. When you house thousands of human beings in a single, mathematically tuned stone city, you are not just providing shelter. You are creating a biological circuit. In the tunnels of Derinkuyu, the ventilation shafts act like the precision pipes of a planetary organ. The chambers are the resonant sound boxes, and the people living within them are the vibrating strings. Because the air and the stone are locked in a single, low-frequency cadence, the heartbeats of the community begin to entrain. The breathing of thousands of people starts to follow a single, slow, rhythmic pulse. This is not a metaphor. It is a biological reality of long-term subterranean life. In the silence, you do not need words to communicate. You do not even need to be in the same room. The architects understood that the human nervous system is a highly sensitive antenna. When you strip away the interference of the sun and the static of the wind, these antennas become capable of incredible feats. You can feel the physical presence of another person through 30 feet of solid rock. You can sense the shift in the collective mood when the air moves through the southern shafts. They had built a neural network made of flesh and lithic resonance. It was a primitive version of a world where everyone is connected, but it was not a digital connection. It was a physical, vibrational union. They were a single, distributed consciousness living inside a colossal stone skull. Imagine the power of that unity. Imagine 1,000 minds, shielded from the noise of the universe, focused on a single, silent thought, in a room that reflects that thought back at them 1,000,000 times. The resonance would be enough to alter the fabric of reality. Maybe that is why they eventually left. Maybe the connection became too intimate, too profound to bear. Maybe the silence started to reveal things about the nature of time and the earth that were too heavy for human shoulders. The walls of these underground cities are covered in the soot of ancient torches, but they are also saturated with a lingering sense of profound waiting. They left the doors open. They left the air flowing. It is as if they simply stepped out for a moment into the sun and forgot how to find their way back. But the pulse has not faded. If you go down into the deep today and stay perfectly still, you can feel it. The stone hasn't forgotten the song of the architects. It is still waiting for the choir to return. Eventually, the great stone wheels were rolled back for the last time. The inhabitants of Derinkuyu climbed upward, squinting against the blinding, chaotic glare of the sun. The subterranean cathedrals of Malta were filled with earth and sealed as if they were tombs. The mirror-polished halls of the Barabar Caves were left to the dust and the slow, indifferent passage of 2,000 years. Why did the architects abandon the perfect sanctuary? There is a threshold to how much truth a human mind can carry in total isolation. In the deep, when you peel away the protective layers of the world's noise, you are left with the raw, unedited signal of your own existence. But that signal is a double-edged sword. Without the distraction of the wind, the seasons, and the daily struggle for survival, the mind begins to perceive its own infinite depth. It is a phenomenon known as the sensory abyss. In absolute darkness, the brain begins to hallucinate light to fill the void. In absolute silence, the nervous system starts to create voices to fill the stillness. The architects had built a machine for clarity, but they had also built a machine that could mirror the internal madness of the soul. The silence was a lens that had become too sharp. Perhaps they realized that humanity was not yet ready to live as a single, vibrating collective. To be so deeply connected that you feel the heartbeat of a stranger through a granite wall is a terrifying burden. It is the dissolution of the ego. It is the end of the I and the beginning of a we that was too vast to control. We are creatures of the surface because the noise protects us. We need the distraction of the day to keep us from hearing the cold, infinite resonance of the universe that sits just behind our eyes. The roar of the sun is our sanctuary. It is a heavy blanket that hides us from the terrifying clarity of the stone. When they stepped back into the light, they chose to be deaf again. They chose the safety of the static over the power of the song, but the structures did not disappear. They sit in the lightless deep, perfectly tuned, broadcasting a silence that no one is brave enough to listen to anymore. Today, we live in the loudest moment in the history of our species. Our world is saturated with the hum of electricity, the mechanical roar of combustion, and the invisible, flickering storm of digital signals. We have wrapped our planet in a cocoon of artificial noise so thick that the deep, slow pulse of the Earth can no longer reach our skin. We have created a reverse quarantine. Instead of going into the stone to hide from the sun, we use the noise of our technology to hide from the stone. We are terrified of the silence that the architects loved. If we stop moving, if we silence our devices and extinguish our lights, we might feel the resonance again, and our modern nervous systems are no longer tuned to survive it. We have become fragile. We are adapted to the high-frequency, fragmented static of the 21st century. If you were to take a modern human and place them in the center of the Barabar Caves for 40 days, they would not find enlightenment. They would find a psychological disintegration. The connection between our bodies and the lithic memory of the planet has been severed. But the Earth is a patient witness. The granite in the mountains of India is the same mineral that was sung into a mirror 2 millennia ago. The ventilation shafts in Turkey still pull the cooling breath of the world into the deep, waiting for lungs to breathe it. The frequency of 110 Hertz still vibrates in the dark of Malta, regardless of whether we believe in it or not. The architects knew that civilizations are like waves. They rise with a roar and fall back into the sea. They knew that the surface would eventually become a place of overwhelming chaos. They built their cities to outlast the memory of our names. They left us the keys to the silence, but they buried them under miles of solid rock. They knew that only those who were truly starving for the truth would ever go deep enough to find them. We are the children of the light, living on the thin, noisy skin of a hollow world. We look at the underground and see death. But they were never meant for the dead. They were the wombs of the living. The architects are gone, but their blueprint is not lost. They did not just carve stone, they etched a frequency into the very structure of our biological inheritance. Every time your heart contracts, it is a drum. Every time you speak, you are a localized vibration. We are the living temples that the silent ones were trying to tune. Modern science has begun to reveal what the architects always knew, that the human body is a liquid crystal. Our bones, our DNA, and the saline water in our cells, all of it reacts to external frequency. When you stand in a place like the Maltese hypogeum, you are not merely a visitor. You are a biological component in a planetary circuit. The stone is the battery. The 110 Hertz resonance is the current, and you are the conductor. The ancient cities were not just dwellings. They were laboratories for the intentional evolution of the human spirit. They knew that if they could align the frequency of 1,000 people into a single coherent wave, they could change the very fabric of the world above. Perhaps the architects did not leave because they failed. Perhaps they left because the work was complete. They had planted a seed of silence in the human lineage, a quiet, dormant spark that remains hidden until the noise of the surface becomes unbearable. Look at our world today. The static has reached its absolute peak. The atmosphere is screaming with 1 billion digital voices, flickering with the restless energy of a civilization that has forgotten how to be still. And in the center of that chaos, a strange, ancient hunger is waking up. People are seeking the dark again. They are traveling to the ruins of Turkey and the caves of India, not to take photographs, but to sit in the absolute weight of the stillness. They are trying to remember a language that has no words. The silence is calling us back, but it isn't calling us to the caves. The caves were only the training ground. The real underground city is the vast, shielded space between your thoughts. The real mirror-polished wall is the clarity of your own awareness when the screen is turned off. The architects didn't build those cities to save themselves. They built them to show us that the stone is not the secret. The secret is the one who is listening to the stone. So, the next time you find yourself in a moment of absolute velvet quiet, do not be afraid. Do not reach for the noise. Do not turn on the light. Stay in the dark. Listen to the hum of your own blood and the deep tectonic rhythm of your own breath. Because in that silence, you are finally speaking the language of the architects, and the earth is waiting to hear what you have to say.